Hi, everyone. So there were some lingering questions after our training, and I wanted to take this opportunity to address them. So the bulk of the questions were about um, helping parents construct effective behavior plans or contracts or agreements with their kids and best practices to draw on when constructing those kinds of plans with parents. And so to respond to that, there are a few things to consider, but the most important principle that you won't be surprised by and is pretty intuitive to you all as behaviorists, most likely, is that we want these plans to be the least punitive as possible, focused on behaviors we want to increase and motivating kind of in a positive way those behaviors and decreasing behaviors we don't want to see, mostly through ignoring, although obviously there will be some exceptions to that. So sometimes we might use some punishment. However, that won't be the main focus. Now, other variables to consider is how collaborative or unilateral the plan is. In other words, how much are parents willing to negotiate around the expectation or not? So, for example, if this is around a safety issue, so for example, if the child is aggressive or threatening to the parents in any way, that's a topic, that's an expectation around which parents might not be willing to negotiate. So there might be consequences to that behavior that parents implement that might be somewhat punishing, honestly, but also not very negotiable, right? At the same time, if the expectation is around helping around the house and doing household chores, that's a topic where we'd like to encourage parents to be negotiable and flexible with their kids and try to get the kids' input. As much as things can be collaborative and gaining the child's input, the better. And at the same time, we also want to balance that with times where or limits around um, or when parents have limits around which they don't feel they can be too flexible on. The other thing to consider is how much control the parents have over the behavior and how much not. So, for example, if a young adult is using substances, if they're using substances outside of the home, there's not much control the parents have over that. At the same time, if they're using the substances in the home, that's a place where it might make sense for parents to set a limit around not using substances in their house. And then finally, you do want to consider the kid's age and have the plan be developmentally appropriate. So for younger kids or teens, young teens who are young at heart, developmentally young, you can use what we use with parents of younger children, even in terms of like using a behavior plan with a point system where the child earns a certain number of points and for each task. And when they accumulate enough points, then they get a reward at the end of the week, say like going out for dinner or getting a drink that they want, like a frappuccino or something like that. With older kids, I don't think that is as appropriate developmentally. However, it might be more developmentally appropriate to work on identifying what privileges and services the parents are providing for the child, um, and making those contingent upon certain expectations. So, for example, things like internet, access to phone, access to the car, allowance. Those are things that sometimes families take for granted, that those are just a given that the kid should receive. And I try to help parents think of those as privileges that the kid can get access to as long as they meet certain expectations. So, for example, if you take out the trash by a certain time on a certain day, then you can have access to the car the next day. And if you don't fulfill that responsibility, then you don't get the car the next day. Sometimes that might feel punitive to the child at first, is if they're in a if the culture at home is that this is a given, and we're trying to kind of shift the culture at home so that it's not always a given. Now, in terms of wording a plan like this, um, you want to be like you might with your patients when kind of putting contingencies in place. You want to be very specific, very clear, very concrete, and then helping the parents focus on their own behavior instead of the children's behavior can be really helpful. So, for example, um, parents sometimes want to word things like, you need to do X, and if you don't do X, then you don't get Y. And the way I try to help parents word things is, we expect X. And if the expectation isn't met, we will respond with Y. And so that helps the parents turn their focus inward into themselves and focus on how they are acting and responding with their children instead of trying to assert control and focus on their children's behaviors as much, which are ultimately out of their control. Another question was around whether I use a template for this kind of plan. And so, to be honest, I really rely on the Dear Man skill to construct how the parents communicate this to the children. Um, and like I showed in the training, I will kind of have the parents start with some validation and some reinforcement, and then dive into the describe and express. And then the assert I make around what the expectations are and how parents will respond if the expectation isn't met. And the negotiate, the N is for parents to negotiate and propose some areas where they're willing to be flexible around and encourage give and take with the child. Um, if that's the case, if there are areas for negotiation after the parents have a conversation with their kid, I might encourage them to kind of redo at least the A part, the assert, in terms of kind of finalizing what the expectations are. And I will have parents write this out and either give it to the kid or read it to the kid, or just have it handy, so everyone is on the same page. And you might put it on the fridge in the kitchen or just somewhere where everyone knows where it is, to make sure things are very clear, there's no misunderstanding, and the kid can refer to it if they need to, in order to clarify things to themselves. And another question was about how I structure parent coaching sessions. And to be honest, again, I structure them kind of like we would in individual sessions in DBT. So at the type of the hierarchy are safety issues or life interfering behaviors, anything that threatens the sense of safety of the child or of the parents kind of goes up at the top, and we talk about that. And then I keep in mind treatment interfering behaviors. So if parents aren't able to follow through on plans, trying to understand what got in the way of that. If parents don't seem as engaged as they could be, kind of talking openly with that about them, with them about that, and addressing things that might interfere with effectiveness of treatment. And then I try to give the floor over to the parents, and see what they want to talk about. What are topics that are affecting their quality of life and quality of the relationship with their children? Another question was around how to make parenting sessions about parenting and not therapy for the parents. I think this question was also on the listserv. Um, and my response is, it's a dialectic. Okay, so obviously, when parents have issues that come up for them in their own lives, separate from their kids, these are going to affect their parenting skills as well. So in the training, I talked about a mother who was a big worrier, probably meets criteria for generalized anxiety disorder. That is going to affect how she responds to her child in anxiety provoking situations, especially. And so I do welcome parents talking about that kind of thing in a session with me. However, I do try to focus it on how it affects their parenting. So it might affect how they feel at work, it might affect how they feel with friends. And we're here to really talk about how it affects their relationship with their children and how they can behave more effectively with their children, given that these are things that cause them distress in their lives. Finally, one question that was a very interesting question, is about helping parents of children with intellectual disabilities. Um, So the question was kind of like what might be some considerations in helping parents who have these issues coming up with their kids, who struggle with this with their kids. So one thing that is important for me to say is that intellectual disabilities is not my area of expertise. At the same time, I have some thoughts given some research I've done and my experience. And so one thing that seems important is that parents, I think, in this kind of situation are going to be expected more than usual to take on the role of a skills coach with their kid and helping parents practice that skill, because being a skills coach takes skill and it can be really hard, especially when it's your own kid, right? So doing a lot of role plays and a lot of coaching on parents on what it means to be a skills coach for their kid. The dialectic of control in the parents' hands versus control in the kids' hands seems to make sense for that to be very present here. So teaching the parents what it's like to take a bit of control until in terms of providing skills coaching and kind of like seizing moments where the kids might struggle to use skills and helping them use skills in those moments, and at the same time doing it in such a way where it's scaffolding and building the kids' ability to be independent rather than taking ownership, complete control and ownership over the kid using the skill and the outcome. It also seems to me really important. We talked about how the space treatment encourages the use of supporters in terms of other family members or friends or the community that can be helpful in the process of DBT and helping the kids um, and the parents act more effectively seems to be really important here too. So making use of the community and helping the parents feel supported, since they're going to have to take more of a central role in helping their kids generalize skills. In terms of plans specifically and how to word things with kids, it seems really important for things to be very concrete, very consistent, very focused on observable behaviors, maybe more than usual. And then I think also helping parents grieve the loss of the life they thought they would have with their child and the life they do have with their child. It seems to me that there would be a lot of loss and grief work to do around this loss. At the same time, though, helping parents tune into their values. We talked a bit about values in the training and parent and values as parents. Um, and helping parents kind of really kind of reflect on what is what matters to them in their parenting. What kind of parents do they want to be, no matter what kind of kids they have, because those core values can be expressed whether your kid has a high IQ or not, right? And so really helping the parents tune into what their values are as parents, and acting in ways that express those values and are consistent with those values with their children. All right, well, I hope you found this helpful. Please feel free to put down any comments you have in the comments section and hope to see you in future events. Thanks so much. Take care.